I was making fun of my husband in front of my girlfriends, but suddenly the worst happened. He came up to me and told me it was over. The sickening crunch of my heart shattering echoed through my ears as I watched Ethan walk away, his shoulders set in grim determination. The laughter and chatter of the neighborhood barbecue faded to a dull roar as the gravity of what just happened hit me. My name is Olivia, I'm 23 years old, and I think I just ruined my entire life. It all started on a balmy Saturday afternoon in the quaint town of Millbrook, nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. The air was thick with the scent of grilling burgers and the sweet perfume of booming lilacs. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was hosting her annual summer kickoff party, an event that had become somewhat of a tradition in our close-knit community. I stood amidst a group of women I considered my friends, a glass of chilled rosé in my hand, giggling at some inane joke. My husband Ethan was over by the grill, diligently flipping burgers and chatting amiably with the other husbands. He caught my eye and smiled, that same warm, loving smile that had first captured my heart 5 years ago, when we were still in college. I should have smiled back. I should have excused myself from the group and gone to give him a kiss, to thank him for being such a wonderful partner. Instead, I rolled my eyes and turned back to my friends, launching into yet another story about how Ethan had bent over backwards to please me earlier that week. "You wouldn't believe what Ethan did the other day," I began, my voice tinged with a mixture of amusement and disdain. I mentioned offhandedly that I was craving sushi from that place in the city, you know, the one that's impossible to get reservations for. Well, the next day, he surprised me with a reservation for that evening. He'd apparently called in some favor with a client just to get us a table. The women around me cooed and sighed, expressing their envy, but I wasn't finished. And get this, I continued, lowering my voice conspiratorially. When we got there, I decided I wasn't in the mood for sushi anymore. I wanted Italian instead. And you know what Ethan did? He just smiled, cancelled our reservation, and took me to that little trattoria down the street. Didn't complain once. I laughed, shaking my head. I swear, that man would bend himself into a pretzel if I asked him to. Sometimes I wonder if he has any backbone at all. The laughter that followed my words was cut short by a sudden silence. I turned, my stomach dropping as I saw Ethan standing there, his face a mask of hurt and disbelief. The plate of burgers in his hands trembled slightly. "Ethan, I began, but he cut me off with a sharp shake of his head. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and controlled. Now, as he led me away from the group, I could feel the eyes of everyone at the party on us. My cheeks burned with shame, but part of me was still in denial about the severity of the situation. Surely, Ethan would forgive me. He always did. We stopped at the far end of the yard, hidden from view by Mrs. Patterson's prize hydrangea bushes. Ethan set the plate of burgers down on a nearby table and turned to face me, his usually warm brown eyes now cold and distant. "I'm done, Olivia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I blinked, not comprehending. "What do you mean, done?" "I mean I'm done with this marriage. I'm done being your punching bag. I'm done being the butt of your jokes. I'm done being disrespected by you and everyone else because you've made it clear that I'm not worthy of respect." His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, shaking my head in denial. "Ethan, come on. It was just a joke. You know I didn't mean..." "Didn't mean what, Olivia?" He interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Didn't mean to humiliate me in front of our friends. Didn't mean to make me feel like less than a man. Didn't mean to take advantage of my love for you." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Ethan, please, I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "That's the problem, Olivia. You never realize. You never stop to think about how your actions affect others. How they affect me." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of his frustration. "I've put up with it for years, thinking that if I just loved you enough, if I just tried hard enough, you'd see me. Really see me. But you don't, do you?" I reached out to touch his arm, but he flinched away. The action sent a spike of pain through my heart. "Ethan, I do see you. I love you. Please, let's just go home and talk about this." He shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "There's nothing left to talk about, Olivia. I'm leaving. When you get home, your things will be packed and waiting for you on the porch. I don't want you in the house anymore." The finality in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't like our usual arguments, where I could sweet-talk my way out of trouble, or where Ethan would eventually cave in to keep the peace. This was different. This was the end. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice rising in panic. "Ethan, this is our home, our life. You can't just throw it all away over one stupid comment." "It's not just one comment, Olivia. It's years of comments. Years of disrespect. Years of me giving everything I have to this relationship while you take and take and take." He looked at me then, and the pain in his eyes made my breath catch. "I love you, Olivia. God help me, I probably always will. But I can't do this anymore. I won't." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone among the hydrangeas, the sounds of the party a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. I watched him make his way through the crowd, stopping briefly to say goodbye to our hosts before disappearing down the street towards our house. Our house, the thought jolted me into action. I hurried after him, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments from our neighbors. By the time I reached our home, a quaint two-story colonial we bought just a year ago, Ethan was already inside. I burst through the front door, calling his name. The sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. Ethan was in the living room, methodically packing my clothes into suitcases. "Ethan, stop," I pleaded, moving to grab the shirt he was folding. "Please, let's just talk about this." He jerked the shirt away from me, his jaw clenched. "There's nothing to talk about, Olivia. I've made my decision." "But you can't just kick me out," I cried, desperation clawing at my throat. "This is my home too." Ethan paused in his packing, fixing me with a hard stare. "Actually, it's not. The house is in my name, remember? You insisted on it because you didn't want to be tied down to a mortgage." The memory of that conversation flooded back to me. I had indeed pushed for Ethan to buy the house on his own, arguing that it would be better for our finances. In reality, I had wanted an easy out if things ever got tough. I never imagined it would backfire on me like this. "Ethan, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry. I'll do better. I'll change. Just give me another chance." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But then he shook his head, his resolve hardening. "I've given you chances, Olivia. More chances than I should have. It's too late now." He finished packing my clothes and moved on to my personal items. I watched helplessly as he efficiently packed away my life, occasionally asking me where I wanted certain things. The surreal nature of the situation made me feel like I was watching a movie of someone else's life falling apart. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our once happy home, Ethan carried the last of my suitcases to the front porch. I stood in the doorway, feeling lost and small. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan sighed, running a hand over his face. For the first time, I noticed how tired he looked, how the lines around his eyes seemed deeper than I remembered. "Call your parents, Olivia. Or one of your friends. I don't know, but you can't stay here." "And what about us?" I asked, clinging to the last shred of hope. "Is this really it?" He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw a lifetime of love and pain in his eyes. "Yeah, Olivia, this is really it. I'll have my lawyer draw up the divorce papers next week." With that, he gently but firmly guided me onto the porch and closed the door. I heard the lock click into place, the sound echoing with a chilling finality. I sank down onto the porch steps, surrounded by my hastily packed life, and let the tears flow freely. The weight of my actions, of years of thoughtlessness and disrespect, crashed down on me. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed my father's number. "Dad?" I said when he answered, my voice choked with tears. "Can you come get me? I've made a terrible mistake." The next few days passed in a blur of tears and regret. My parents welcomed me back home with open arms, though I could see the disappointment in their eyes. They had always adored Ethan, viewing him as the son they never had. Now, as I recounted the events that led to our separation, I could see them struggling to understand how I could have treated someone they considered family so poorly. I spent most of my time holed up in my childhood bedroom, alternating between crying into my pillow and staring blankly at the walls. The cheery yellow paint and faded posters from my teenage years seemed to mock me, reminders of a simpler time when my biggest worry was what to wear to prom. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends who had heard about what happened at the barbecue. Most were a mix of concern and curiosity, eager for the juicy details of my marital breakdown. A few, like my supposed best friend Alexis, were more sympathetic, offering words of support and promises to be there for me. But as the days wore on and the reality of my situation sank in, I began to see these friendships for what they truly were: shallow connections built on gossip and mutual self-interest. None of them really cared about me or my pain. They were just happy to have some drama to discuss over their morning coffee. It was during one of my rare ventures out of my room, on a trip to the kitchen for a glass of water, that I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones. "I just don't understand how she could have been so thoughtless," my mother was saying, her voice tinged with sadness. "We raised her better than that." My father sighed heavily. "I know, dear, but Olivia's always been, well, you know how she is. Always wanting to be the center of attention, never really thinking about how her actions affect others." "But Ethan," my mother replied, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "He was so good to her, so patient. Remember how he used to bring her breakfast in bed every Sunday? Or how he'd surprise her with little gifts for no reason at all?" "I know," my father said softly. "He loved her more than anything, and she threw it all away." I retreated back to my room, their words ringing in my ears. For the first time, I truly began to see myself through others' eyes. The image wasn't flattering. That night, unable to sleep, I decided to do something I should have done days ago. I opened my laptop and started a new document. At the top, I typed, "Ways I had Ethan." As I began to list out all the times I had taken Ethan for granted, all the times I had belittled him or dismissed his feelings, all the times I had put my own desires above his needs, the document grew longer and longer. By the time the first rays of dawn began to peek through my curtains, I had filled page after page with my transgressions. Reading through the list was like a punch to the gut. How had I become this person? How had I allowed myself to treat someone I claimed to love with such callous disregard? With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. I knew it was early, but I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to talk to Ethan, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness if necessary. But when I pulled up his contact, my thumb hovering over the call button, I hesitated. What right did I have to disturb his peace? To force him to confront the pain I had caused him? And what would I even say? In that moment, I realized that my desire to call him was just another selfish act. I wanted to ease my own guilt, to make myself feel better. But what about what Ethan needed? With a heavy heart, I put my phone down. For once in my life, I decided to put someone else's needs before my own. If Ethan wanted space, I would give him space. If he wanted to move on without me, as much as it hurt, I would respect his decision. Instead, I opened my laptop again and started a new document. This time, I titled it, "How to Become a Better Person." It was time for me to do the hard work of self-reflection and personal growth. Not for Ethan, not to win him back, but for myself. Because I never wanted to be the kind of person who could hurt someone they loved ever again. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Life went on, as it tends to do, even when you feel like your world has stopped turning. I remained at my parents' house, slowly piecing together the shattered remnants of my life. The divorce proceedings were mercifully quick and straightforward. Ethan, ever the gentleman, didn't try to fight me on anything. He even agreed to a small alimony payment, despite the fact that I had contributed little financially to our marriage. His kindness, even in the face of our separation, was just another reminder of what I had thrown away. I got a job, an entry-level position at a local marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly data entry and coffee runs, but it was a start. For the first time in my adult life, I was supporting myself, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of earning my own money. My social life, once the center of my world, had dwindled to almost nothing. Most of my so-called friends had drifted away once they realized I was no longer a source of gossip or entertainment. Alexis stuck around for a while, but even she eventually stopped calling when it became clear that I was no longer interested in our old lifestyle of parties and mindless chatter. The silence and solitude, once my greatest fears, became my teachers. In the quiet of my room, with only my thoughts for company, I began the hard work of self-improvement. I read self-help books, started journaling, and even began seeing a therapist to work through my issues. Dr. Larson, my therapist, was a kind but no-nonsense woman in her 50s. In our sessions, she helped me unpack years of selfish behavior and skewed perceptions. "Olivia," she said during one particularly difficult session, "have you ever considered why you felt the need to belittle Ethan in front of your friends?" I shrugged, picking at a loose thread on the arm of the chair. I guess I thought it made me look good. Like I had this great guy who would do anything for me, and I was so amazing that he put up with anything. Dr. Larson nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you think that made Ethan feel?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. For perhaps the first time in my life, I truly put myself in Ethan's shoes. I imagined how it must have felt to constantly be the butt of jokes, to have his love and devotion mocked and taken for granted. "Horrible," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. It must have made him feel so small, so worthless. "Exactly," Dr. Larson said gently. "Olivia, true love isn't about control or showing off. It's about mutual respect, support, and kindness. It's about lifting each other up, not tearing each other down." Her words stayed with me long after the session ended. I began to see all my past relationships, not just with Ethan but with friends and family as well, in a new light. I realized how often I had prioritized my own needs and desires over everyone else's, how I had used people for my own gain without considering their feelings. It was a painful realization, but a necessary one. I knew that if I ever wanted to have healthy relationships in the future, I needed to make some serious changes. One day, about 6 months after the fateful barbecue, I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the local grocery store. I had been avoiding most of our old neighbors, too ashamed to face them after the way things had ended with Ethan. But there was no escaping the kind-faced woman as she spotted me in the produce aisle. "Olivia, dear," she called out, pushing her cart towards me. "How are you?" I forced a smile, bracing myself for the awkward conversation ahead. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson. I'm doing okay. How are you?" To my surprise, Mrs. Patterson's face softened with genuine concern. "Oh, honey," she said, reaching out to pat my arm. "I've been worried about you. We all have." A kindness, so unexpected, brought tears to my eyes. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, hastily wiping at my cheeks. I've made such a mess of everything." Mrs. Patterson glanced around, then gently steered me towards a quiet corner of the store. "Listen, Olivia," she said, her voice low and kind. "We all make mistakes. Lord knows I've made my fair share. The important thing is that we learn from them." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Have you talked to Ethan recently?" she asked carefully. I shook my head. "No, I've been giving him space. I don't think he wants to hear from me." Mrs. Patterson sighed. "You might be surprised, dear. Ethan's been asking about you, you know." My head snapped up, hope flaring in my chest. "He has." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "He's worried about you, wants to know if you're okay." The knowledge that Ethan still cared enough to ask about me, even after everything I'd done, was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. It was just so Ethan, always thinking of others, even when they didn't deserve it. "I don't deserve his concern," I said softly. Mrs. Patterson clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Nah, none of that. We all deserve compassion, Olivia. even when we've made mistakes, especially then. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad and pen. Quickly scribbling something down, she tore off the page and handed it to me. "This is Ethan's new number," she said. "He changed it a while back. I think he might appreciate hearing from you." I stared at the number, my heart racing. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my arm gently. "You don't have to decide right now. Just think about it, okay?" I nodded, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into my pocket. As Mrs. Patterson said goodbye and continued with her shopping, I stood there, feeling as if the world had shifted on its axis. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the piece of paper with Ethan's number. My phone lay beside me, silent and accusing. I picked it up, my fingers hovering over the keypad. What would I even say? How do you apologize for years of thoughtlessness and disrespect? How do you ask forgiveness from someone you've hurt so deeply? In the end, I decided on a text. It felt cowardly, but I knew if I heard his voice, I might lose my nerve completely. "Ethan," I typed, my hands shaking slightly. "It's Olivia. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I completely understand if you don't respond. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what happened at the barbecue, but for everything. For all the times I took you for granted, for all the times I made you feel less than the amazing person you are. You deserve so much better. I'm truly, deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. I hope you're doing well and finding happiness. You deserve it more than anyone I know." I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then promptly threw my phone across the room as if it had burned me. My heart was pounding, and I felt slightly nauseous. What had I done? For the next few hours, I alternated between pacing my room and staring at my phone, waiting it to buzz with a response. But as the night wore on and no message came, I began to accept that Ethan had moved on. And really, wasn't that what I wanted for him? To be happy, even if it meant a life without me in it. Just as I was about to give up and try to get some sleep, my phone lit up with a new message. My heart in my throat, I opened it. "Olivia," it read. "Thank you for your message. It means a lot to hear that from you. I hope you're doing well too. Take care." It wasn't much, but it was something. A small olive branch extended across the chasm I had created between us. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work, therapy sessions, and quiet nights at home. I threw myself into self-improvement with a fervor that surprised even me. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding joy in caring for creatures that ask for nothing but love in return. I took up yoga and meditation, learning to quiet the constant chatter in my mind and find peace and stillness. Ethan and I exchanged a few more text messages, each one cordial but distant. We didn't discuss getting back together or even meeting in person. It was clear that while he no longer harbored anger towards me, the trust between us had been irreparably broken. It was during this time that I ran into an old acquaintance from the neighborhood, Sarah. She had never been part of my inner circle, mainly because my friend Alexis had some sort of unexplained issue with her. But now, free from the toxic influence of my former friends, I found myself genuinely enjoying Sarah's company. We met for coffee one afternoon, and as we chatted, Sarah filled me in on the neighborhood gossip. I listened with a mixture of interest and detachment, realizing how much I had changed in the past months. The petty dramas that once consumed my life now seemed trivial and unimportant. "Oh, and get this," Sarah said, leaning in conspiratorially. "You know your ex-friends, Alexis, Tina, and the rest?" I nodded, a sense of unease creeping over me. "Well, word on the street is they've all been trying to get with Ethan," Sarah said, her eyes wide. "Can you believe it? The same women who used to laugh at your jokes about him are now falling all over themselves to catch his attention." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a confusing mix of emotions. Anger at my former friend's disloyalty, jealousy at the thought of Ethan with someone else, and a deep, aching sadness to the relationships I had destroyed. "Has he? Has he shown interest in any of them? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah shook her head. Not from what I've heard. Ethan's been keeping to himself mostly. Focuses on his work, goes to the gym a lot. He seems, I don't know, more confident somehow. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips despite the pain in my heart. That sounded like Ethan, using adversity as a chance for personal growth. You know, Sarah said softly, reaching out to touch my hand. I never really understood why you and I were closer before. I always thought you seemed nice, underneath all the, well, you know. I laughed ruefully. Underneath all the drama and selfishness, you mean? Sarah smiled sympathetically. We all have our moments, Olivia. The important thing is that you're trying to be better now. That counts for a lot in my book. Her words warmed me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of a genuine friendship forming. As the months continued to pass, I found myself settling into a new rhythm of life. My job at the marketing firm had evolved into a more challenging role, and I was thriving my responsibility. My relationship with my parents had improved dramatically as they saw the changes I was making in my life, and my friendship with Sarah had blossomed into a true connection based on mutual respect and shared interests. But despite these positive changes, there was still an Ethan-shaped hole in my heart. I missed him with an ache that never quite went away, a constant reminder of what I had carelessly thrown away. It was on a crisp autumn day, almost a year after our separation, that I ran into Ethan for the first time since that fateful barbecue. I was leaving my favorite coffee shop, a stack of files tucked under one arm and a latte in my free hands, when I quite literally bumped into him. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, trying to balance my coffee and keep my files from spilling everywhere. Then I looked up and met a pair of familiar brown eyes. "Ethan," I breathed, feeling as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "Olivia," he replied, his voice soft and uncertain. "Here, let me help you with that." He reached out and steadied my coffee cup, his fingers brushing against mine for a brief moment. Even that slight touch sent a jolt through my system. "Thank you," I managed to say, my heart pounding. How are you?" Ethan smiled, and I was struck by how good he looked. He'd always been handsome, but now there was a confidence about him that was undeniably attractive. "I'm doing well," he said. "How about you? Sarah mentioned you've been working at Millbrook Marketing." The fact that he knew this, that he'd asked about me, made my pulse quicken. "Yes, I have," I replied. "It's been challenging, but in a good way. I'm learning a lot." Ethan nodded approvingly. "That's great, Olivia. I'm happy for you." An awkward silence fell between us. There was so much I wanted to say, so many apologies I wanted to make, but the words stuck in my throat. "Listen," Ethan said finally, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of nervousness. "I was just about to grab a coffee. Would you like to join me? To catch up?" The offer took me by surprise. For a moment, I was transported back to our college days, when we'd spend hours in coffee shops talking about everything and nothing. But we weren't those carefree kids anymore. We were two adults with a painful history between us. "Are you sure?" I asked hesitantly. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable." Ethan's smile was gentle. "I'm sure. I think it might be good for us to talk." And so, with butterflies in my stomach and hope blooming in my chest, I followed Ethan back into the coffee shop. We settled into a quiet corner booth, our hands wrapped around steaming mugs. For a few moments we sat in silence, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy between us. So Ethan began, his voice soft but steady. "How have you really been, Olivia?" I took a deep breath, deciding in that moment to be completely honest. "It's been hard," I admitted. "Losing you, realizing how badly I'd messed up. It was like waking up from a long, selfish dream. But it's also been eye-opening. I've learned a lot about myself, about the kind of person I want to be." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm glad to hear that. You seem different, more grounded." "I'm trying to be," I said. I've been seeing a therapist, Dr. Larson. She's been helping me work through a lot of my issues. That's great, Olivia, Ethan said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. I'm proud of you for taking that step. His words brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. Ethan, I am so sorry for everything. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know how deeply I regret the way I treated you. You deserved so much better. Ethan reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. I appreciate that, Olivia. Really, I do. And I forgive you. I looked up at him, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. You do? He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. I do. It hasn't been easy, and it took a lot of time in my own therapy sessions, but I've come to a place where I can honestly say I forgive you. Holding on to that anger and hurt, it wasn't good for me. I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Thank you, I said, my voice choked with emotion. That means more to me than you know. We spent the next hour catching up, sharing stories about our lives over the past year. Ethan told me about his promotion at work, his newfound passion for rock climbing, and the stray cat he'd adopted. I told him about my job, my volunteer work at the animal shelter, and my budding friendship with Sarah. As our conversation drew to a close, I felt a bittersweet ache in my chest. It had been so good to talk to Ethan again, to laugh with him and share our lives. But I knew that this didn't mean we were getting back together. Too much had happened, too much trust had been broken. This was nice, Ethan said, as we stood to leave. I'm glad we ran into each other. Me too, I replied, smiling through the tears that threatened to fall. Ethan, I know things can never go back to how they were before. But do you think we could be friends? Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had always made my heart skip a beat. I'd like that, Olivia. I think we could try. As we said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. Sadness for what we had lost, joy for this new beginning, and hope for what the future might hold. Walking home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. I had lost so much: my marriage, my friends, my sense of self. But in losing those things, I had gained something far more valuable: self-awareness, personal growth, and the chance to become a better person. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Building a friendship with Ethan would require patience, understanding, and a level of emotional maturity I was still working on. There would be awkward moments, painful reminders of our past, and the constant temptation to hope for more. I had made mistakes, big ones. I had hurt people I loved and taken for granted the blessings in my life. But I had also learned from those mistakes. I had faced the ugly parts of myself and committed to change. And in doing so, I had discovered a strength within myself that I never knew existed. As I reached the front door of my apartment, my own place, paid for with my own hard-earned money, I paused. Looking back at the path that had led me here, I felt a surge of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons, however painful they had been. Gratitude for the people who had stood by me, even when I didn't deserve it. And gratitude for second chances, not just with Ethan, but with myself. I entered my apartment, kicking off my shoes and settling onto the couch. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I made a promise to myself. A promise to never again take for granted the people in my life. A promise to always strive to be better, to be kinder, to be more understanding. And most importantly, a promise to love myself enough to never settle for being less than the best version of myself.